They threatened fines, lawsuits, and daily harassment if I didn't remove the fence immediately. What they didn't expect was that every step I took was legal, documented, and approved, and when the HOA dragged me into court, the electric fence wasn't the problem. It was the reason the judge shut them down for good. The letter came taped to my mailbox like a threat, bright white paper flapping in the morning wind. I noticed it before I even stepped off my porch. The HOA logo stamped at the top like a warning sign. I already knew what it was about. When you live in a quiet, semi-rural neighborhood long enough, you develop a sixth sense for trouble, especially when a homeowners association decides your problem. I stood there for a moment, coffee cooling in my hand, staring at my own front yard. Acres of grass stretched out toward the tree line, dew still clinging to the blades. This land had been in my family for years, long before the HOA existed. But none of that mattered to the board. To them, I was just another homeowner who didn't comply. The letter accused me of unauthorized perimeter deterrence and hostile landscaping. That phrase actually made me laugh. Hostile landscaping. All I had done was put up a few warning signs after HOA members and their contractors started cutting across my property like it was a public park. Trucks, ATVs, even joggers straight through my land. When I complained, the HOA president told me I should be more neighborly. I crumpled the letter and walked back inside. My wife watched me from the kitchen, her face tight with concern. "Another one?" she asked. "Yeah," I said. "This time they're threatening legal action." That was the moment something in me snapped, not in a reckless way, but in a calm, cold way. I was done being pushed around. I'd tried polite emails. I'd attended meetings where they talked over me and smirked. I'd hired a surveyor to prove the land was mine. None of it stopped them. That afternoon, I made a call. The electric fence wasn't some wild, cartoonish setup. No sparks flying, no dramatic hum. It was a legal low-voltage agricultural fence, installed by a licensed professional, fully permitted, clearly marked, and compliant with county regulations. I triple-checked everything. I wasn't looking to hurt anyone. I was looking to make a point and protect what was mine. When the installer finished, the fence blended into the landscape. Thin wires ran cleanly along the boundary line, barely noticeable unless you knew where to look. Warning signs were posted every few feet, bright yellow and impossible to miss. 2 days later, my phone started blowing up. The HOA president left a voicemail, her voice sharp and furious, accusing me of endangering the community. She demanded I remove the fence immediately. I didn't respond. Instead, I forwarded the message to my attorney. By the end of the week, I was officially served. The HOA filed a complaint claiming the fence was aggressive, intimidating, and a public nuisance. They wanted fines, removal, and damages. They assumed I'd panic. They assumed I'd fold. They were wrong. Walking into court a month later, I felt strangely calm. The HOA showed up with a lawyer who looked bored and confident, carrying a thick folder like it was already over. The president sat behind him, arms crossed, wearing a satisfied smile. My attorney laid everything out slowly and methodically. Property lines, permits, county codes, case law, photos showing tire tracks, broken branches, and repeated trespassing incidents. Emails from the HOA dismissing my complaints. Even the warning signs, dated and documented. When the judge turned to the HOA's lawyer and asked why they believed they had the right to access my land, the room went quiet. There was no good answer, just vague statements about community use and tradition. The judge frowned. By the time the hearing ended, the smile on the HOA president's face was gone. The ruling was clear. The fence was legal. The HOA had overstepped. Not only was the case dismissed, but the judge warned the association about future harassment and ordered them to cover my legal fees. As I walked out of the courthouse, sunlight hitting my face, I realized something important. Standing up for yourself doesn't always look dramatic. Sometimes it looks like paperwork, patience, and letting your opponents destroy themselves with their own arrogance. And the electric fence? It's still there. The first letter from the HOA arrived 3 days after the fence went live. I knew it was coming. Still, seeing that thick envelope with the association's logo stamped in aggressive blue ink made my stomach tighten. They never mailed anything unless they wanted blood, money, or both. Inside was exactly what I expected, and worse. Notice of violation. It began, followed by a list of alleged infractions: unauthorized electrical installation, unsafe perimeter structure, aesthetic noncompliance, and my personal favorite, creation of a hostile environment. They demanded the fence be removed within 10 days or I'd face daily fines, legal action, and further remedies as deemed appropriate. No mention of the months of threats I'd endured. No mention of the board member who'd leaned over my gate and whispered, "You'll regret this." No mention of the late-night inspections where flashlights swept across my yard like I was hiding contraband instead of chickens. They wanted me scared. Instead, I smiled, because unlike them, I prepared. Before installing the fence, I'd spent weeks doing homework, county ordinances, state agricultural exemptions, electrical safety codes, even case law. The fence wasn't some backyard booby trap. I'd hired a licensed contractor, pulled permits, and installed warning placards every 20 feet. The voltage was legal. The amperage was safe. Painful, yes. Dangerous, no. And best of all, the HOA had zero authority over agricultural fencing on my parcel. My land was grandfathered in long before their manicured lawns and matching mailboxes existed. I drafted my response carefully. No insults, no emotion, just facts. I cited statutes, attached permits, included inspection certificates. I ended with a single sentence that I knew would hit like a slap. Any further interference with my lawful use of this property will be considered harassment and documented accordingly. 2 days later, the harassment escalated. The HOA president, Linda, showed up with 2 board members and a clipboard, standing just outside the fence line like they were confronting a wild animal. I watched from my porch as they gestured angrily, pointing at the fence posts, whispering to each other. Linda stepped forward. She didn't see the warning sign. She didn't hear me shout. She touched the fence. The sound she made wasn't a scream. It was a sharp, shock yelp, like the air had been punched out of her lungs. She stumbled backward, clutching her hand, face twisted in disbelief. And just like that, everything changed. Within an hour, I had emails accusing me of assault. By evening, they'd filed an emergency injunction claiming the fence was a deliberate trap designed to injure HOA officials. That's when I knew this wasn't staying neighborhood drama. This was going to court. My lawyer, a calm older man who'd handled everything from land disputes to wrongful arrests, read the complaint and laughed out loud. They touched an electric fence, he said, on private property, with warning signs. That's not a strong case. But the HOA doubled down. They hired an aggressive firm and demanded immediate removal of the fence pending trial. When I refused, they went public, posting warnings on community boards, hinting that I was dangerous, unstable, a menace. Neighbors who'd once waved now avoided eye contact. That hurt more than I expected. Still, I kept documenting everything. Every letter, every visit, every message. When someone tried to cut the power line and tripped the breaker instead, I added photos to file. When a board member emailed that I was asking for trouble, I saved it twice. The court date arrived faster than I thought. Walking into that courtroom, I didn't feel angry. I felt ready, because the HOA thought this was about control. They didn't realize it was about proof, and I had plenty. By the 3rd week, the electric fence had become the most talked about thing in the neighborhood, whether people admitted it or not. I could feel the attention every time I stepped outside. Curtains twitched. Phones came out. Cars slowed just a little too much as they passed my property line. The HOA's threat letter had done exactly what it was meant to do, escalate. What they didn't expect was that I'd be ready. I'd installed the fence legally, by the book. Proper signage, correct voltage, permits filed with the county. I'd even paid an inspector to come out and verify everything, just so there would be no ambiguity later. When he signed off, I made 3 copies of the report and slipped one into a folder labeled, very deliberately, HOA. The president, Linda, made her move 2 days later. I was repairing a section of old fence near the barn when her SUV rolled up, tires crunching over the gravel shoulder like she owned the place. She didn't get out right away. Instead, she sat there with the engine running, sunglasses on, staring at the electric line like it was personally offending her. Finally, she stepped out, clipboard tucked under her arm. "You can't do this," she said, not bothering with hello. I stayed where I was, leaning on the post driver. "County says I can. The HOA says you can't." I smiled. Not wide, not smug, just enough. "That's interesting, because the HOA doesn't own my land." Her jaw tightened. "You're creating a dangerous environment." "For who?" I asked. "Trespassers." She bristled. "I'm issuing a violation. You'll receive notice. Daily fines will apply until this hazard is removed." I reached into my back pocket and pulled out my phone. "Before you do that, you might want to talk to your lawyer." That earned me a sharp laugh. "Oh, we will." "Good," I said. "So will I." The letter arrived the next morning. Not a warning this time. A formal notice of enforcement, complete with demand to remove the fence within 72 hours or face escalating penalties and legal action. They cited aesthetic disruption, community safety, and, my favorite, unauthorized deterrence. I didn't reply. Instead, I forwarded everything to my attorney. Court moved faster than I expected. Turns out, the HOA had a reputation. Mine wasn't the first file on record with their name attached, and judges don't tend to be patient with organizations that cry wolf too often. The day of the hearing, Linda sat 3 rows ahead of me, flanked by a young lawyer who kept whispering into her ear. She looked confident, smug, even like this was already over. When it was my turn, my attorney stood and laid it all out, calmly, methodically. Property boundaries, county ordinances, permit approvals, inspection reports, photos, videos, even timestamps showing repeated HOA members enter my land without permission. Then came the fence. The electric fence, my lawyer said, is fully compliant with state and county regulations. It poses no unreasonable risk, is clearly marked, and exists solely on my client's private property. The judge leaned forward. "And the HOA claims jurisdiction?" "Yes, Your Honor." The HOA lawyer said quickly, "Our bylaws do not supersede county law." The judge cut in, "Or property rights." Linda's face went pale. My attorney wasn't finished. "Additionally, we are filing a counterclaim for harassment, unlawful fines, and repeated trespass. We have documentation." The room went very quiet. By the end of the session, the ruling was clear. The HOA had no authority to force removal of the fence. All fines were dismissed. The counterclaim would proceed. Outside the courthouse, Linda didn't look at me. Not once. The fence stayed. And for the first time since moving there, my land felt like it was truly mine. The letter arrived on a Tuesday, folded crisp and smug inside an HOA-branded envelope. I could tell before I opened it. Same return address. Same cheap paper. Same threat dressed up as community standards. This time, though, they'd escalated. The notice claimed my new electric fence was a hostile deterrent, a safety hazard, and my favorite, an act of intimidation against HOA officials. They demanded I remove it within 7 days or face daily fines, legal action, and possible forced remediation. I laughed out loud, not because it was funny, but because it was desperate. The fence had been installed professionally. Permits pulled, inspections passed. Clear warning signage posted every 10 feet. It didn't touch common property. It didn't violate county code. And most importantly, it only existed because HOA members had repeatedly trespassed, threatened me, and tried to inspect my land without permission. They didn't like losing access. What they didn't know was that I'd stopped reacting emotionally weeks ago. Everything since then had been documentation. I sat down at my kitchen table and laid it all out. Timestamps of threats, security footage of board members stepping over my property line, emails demanding access, the prior police report when one of them shoved my gate. I added the certified letters I'd sent warning them to stop. I included the electrician's report explaining the fence's output. Non-lethal, livestock grade, legal. Then I did something that clearly rattled them. I replied politely. I thanked the HOA for their concern. I attached copies of permits. I cited county code. I reminded them that further attempt to fine or harass me would be considered retaliation. And I ended with a single sentence that changed the tone of everything. All future communication should be directed to my attorney. The response was immediate and unhinged. Within 48 hours, they filed for an emergency injunction, claiming the fence posed imminent danger to children and pets. They even included photos taken from my yard, photos that proved, beyond any doubt, that they'd trespass again after being warned. By the time the court date rolled around, the HOA president looked confident, smug, even. She brought 2 board members, a stack of papers, and the kind of attitude people have when they bullied their way through life without consequences. My attorney brought a tablet. The judge didn't interrupt at first. She let the HOA attorney speak. He painted me as hostile, uncooperative, dangerous. He claimed the fence was punitive, malicious, installed in anger. Then it was our turn. My lawyer didn't argue. He played video. Footage of HOA members entering my property. Audio of threats. Emails demanding access, or else. A clip of the president saying, "We'll make this so expensive you'll beg us to stop." The courtroom went quiet. The judge leaned forward. When my attorney finished, he calmly pointed out that not only was the fence legal, but the HOA's actions constituted harassment, retaliation, and repeated trespass. He requested the injunction be denied. He also requested sanctions. The judge didn't even recess. The injunction was denied on the spot. Then came the part no one expected. The judge admonished the HOA for abusing its authority, warned them against further contact, and invited my attorney to file a civil claim for damages, including legal fees. The HOA president's face drained of color. Outside the courtroom, she tried to speak to me. I didn't respond. I didn't have to. 2 weeks later, the fines were rescinded. The threats stopped. The board quietly changed its policies about private property enforcement, and the fence, it stayed exactly where it was. Sometimes the hard way is in pain. Sometimes it's paperwork precedent and a judge who's had enough. And sometimes the best defense isn't offense at all. It's knowing the law better than the people trying to scare you. The silence afterward was almost unsettling. For weeks, my life had been a low-grade war, emails, letters, threats disguised as policy reminders. Then suddenly, nothing. No board members driving by. No notices taped to my gate. No emergency meetings, announced with my name thinly veiled between the lines. That's how I knew the court loss had rattled them. I didn't let my guard down. I kept the cameras rolling, the documents updated, and my attorney on retainer. But day by day, it became clear. The HOA had finally realized they'd picked the wrong homeowner. Then came the settlement letter. It arrived certified and signed by any individual, just the board. The tone was noticeably different. No accusations, no ultimatums, just quiet concessions. They agreed to permanently withdraw all fines, acknowledge my property boundaries in writing, and formally prohibit any HOA representative from entering my land without explicit permission or a warrant. Buried near the end was the real prize, reimbursement of my legal fees. It wasn't an apology, but it was close enough. At the next HOA meeting, something interesting happened. I didn't attend, but 3 neighbors called me afterward. Apparently, the president had resigned. No speech, no explanation, just a brief announcement and a scramble to adjourn before questions got uncomfortable. The new board chair took over and immediately proposed policy changes. Clearer limits on HOA authority, mandatory legal review before enforcement actions, and strict penalties for board members who trespassed or harassed residents. Funny how fast community standards evolve when consequences show up. A month later, I ran into one of the former board members at the grocery store. He didn't recognize me at first. Then it clicked. His posture stiffened, eyes darting like he expected a confrontation. I nodded politely and kept walking. That was the moment I realized something important. Winning wasn't about humiliation. It was about freedom, about reclaiming peace. The electric fence became a non-issue. Delivery drivers noticed the signs and stayed clear. Neighbors respected the boundary. No one touched it. No one challenged it. It just existed, like a quiet reminder that my property wasn't suggestion. Every so often, someone online asked me if it was worth it. The stress, the money, the risk. Here's the truth they don't expect. It wasn't the fence that taught the HOA a lesson. It was preparation. It was refusing to be intimidated. It was understanding the law better than the people trying to weaponize it. And it was realizing that bullies rely on silence and fear, because once those disappear, they've got nothing left. I didn't set out to make an example, but if one HOA board thinks twice before threatening the wrong homeowner, if one person decides to document instead of panic, then yeah, they learn the hard way. And I learned I never needed permission to defend what was already mine.